The Georgia Tag Team Championship was the primary tag title in the Georgia territory of the National Wrestling Alliance from the late 1960s into the 1980s. There were recognized Georgia Tag Champions in the mid-1950s, but like many tag championships at the time, records are thin and the title was apparently abandoned shortly after it was initiated. It's questionable at best if it's even considered part of the same lineage. We'll take a look at every team that held the belts for the primary run of the tag titles between 1968 and 1980. Like every lineage video on this channel, it's not a deep dive into every title reign. I call it a glorified list of champions, but we will slow down and take a look at some interesting points along the way. It's only a 12-year history, but there's quite a bit packed into those 12 years. So let's get into it. The championship was originally known as the NWA Georgia Tag Team Championship, the name it would carry through its existence. The first champions were crowned with an 8-team tournament held in Atlanta, Georgia on July 5, 1968. The Torres brothers, Alberto and Ramon, defeated El Mongol and Tarzan Tyler in the tournament final to become the first Georgia Tag Team Champions. If you watched the Texas Tag Team Championship lineage video, you may remember they held that championship just a few years earlier. The Torres brothers had been feuding with the Vachon brothers for several months, and after 63 days dropped the tag titles to Butcher and Stan Vachon on September 6, 1968 in Atlanta. Stan was a kayfabe brother to Butcher and Mad Dog for a couple of years. Butcher and Stan only held the belts 14 days, losing them back to Alberto and Ramon on September 20th, 1968 in Atlanta, making the Torres brothers the first team to hold the title more than once. The Torres brothers and Vachon brothers continued to trade the belts back and forth, with Butcher and Stan taking the belts back on October 29, 1968 in Savannah, Georgia, the first time the belts changed hands outside Atlanta. Another 13 days later, Alberto and Ramon won the belts back again on November 11, 1968 in Augusta, Georgia, and that essentially brought that feud to an end. Alberto and Ramon only held the title 11 days in that third run, losing the belts to the Assassins on November 22, 1968 in Atlanta. This was the original Assassins, Jody Hamilton tagging with Tom Renesto. This started a somewhat short feud over the belts between the two teams. The Assassins held the championship 33 days, losing the belts back to Alberto and Ramon Torres on Christmas Day 1968 in Savannah. Alberto and Ramon's then record fourth reign as Georgia Tag Team Champions took things into 1969 before they dropped them to Assassin number 2 and the Professional on January 25th in Atlanta. This was also the last time the Torres brothers held the tag championship. Assassin number 2 was actually Jody Hamilton at the time. The Assassins and the Professional had a 3-man squad working together for a short period of time, which was apparently just to set up the Assassins turning on the Professional. Assassin 2 and the Pro held the Georgia Tag belts for 55 days, losing them on March 21, 1969 in Atlanta to Buddy Fuller and Ray Gunkel. I can't determine exactly what happened. Every source I check says something a little different. But apparently Fuller and Gunkel won the match by countout, and perhaps by referee's decision were awarded the belts. The NWA then stepped in and said titles don't change hands on a countout, and officially declared them vacant, though Fuller and Gunkel are recognized as being champions for one day. This was also apparently when the Assassins turned on the Professional, as just a few days later the Pro was tagging with babyfaces against the Assassins. An 8-team tournament was held in Atlanta on April 4, 1969, ending with the Assassins defeating El Mongol and Louis Tillett in the finals to regain the tag belts. This would turn out to be the longest single reign in the short history of the belts at the time. The Assassins were champions for 84 days, dropping them to El Mongol and the Professional on June 27, 1969 in Atlanta. Mongol and the Pro had a short run with the belts, lasting only 13 days before they lost them to, and I know I'm going to butcher this name, Chedi Yokuchi and Mr. Ito in Athens, Georgia. I have no idea if I pronounced that first name right, but you can see it on the screen. This team, held the tag title 51 days, losing the belts to the Assassins on August 30th, 1969 in Atlanta. The Assassins continued to feud with Ray Gunkel, Buddy Fuller, and the Professional over the belts, leading to some trading back and forth. Buddy Fuller and Ray Gunkel defeated the Assassins for the title on October 10th, 1969, and kept the belts much longer than one day this time around. Fuller and Gunkel held the championship 70 days before losing them back to the Assassins in an unusual manner. The tag titles were on the line in a six-man tag match. The Assassins teamed with Nick Bockwinkel against Fuller, Gunkel, and the Professional on December 19, 1969, in Atlanta. The Assassins set a new high for longest title reign, taking the belts into 1970 with a 98-day title run. They finally lost the title back to Buddy Fuller and Ray Gunkel on March 27, 1970, in Atlanta. This is often listed as March 20th, but Fuller and Gunkel won a match by disqualification on March 20th, so the titles didn't change hands. The title change was on March 27th. Fuller and Gunkel officially vacated the tag championship on June 1st, 1970. Gunkel wanted to concentrate on winning the Georgia Heavyweight Championship, and rather than take on another partner, Fuller chose to simply relinquish the title. The Georgia Tag Championship remained vacant until an 8-team tournament was held in Atlanta on July 3rd, 1970, when Bobby Shane and a now unmasked professional going by the name Doug Gilbert defeated Homer Odell and Buddy Colt in the final to crown new champions. Shane and Gilbert had a nice run of 56 days with the belts before dropping them to the Assassins in Atlanta on August 28, 1970. This gave this version of Assassin No. 1 and Assassin No. 2 a record 5th run with the Georgia Tag Championship, which is a record they would only add to over the next couple of years. The Assassins held the belts for 28 days this time around, losing them back to Bobby Shane and Doug Gilbert. However, Shane and the Pro would not keep the belts. The only thing I could find was that Shane and Gilbert wore illegal headgear, which apparently consisted of amateur wrestling headgear, which apparently wasn't allowed. Shane and the Professional were stripped of the tag titles after one day, though they are recognized as holding the championship. The titles remained vacant until a 3-team round-robin tournament was held on October 16, 1970 in Atlanta. Bobby Shane and Doug Gilbert, the Assassins, and Mr. Ito and the Great Oto were in the tournament, with the Assassins coming out the winners and taking the belts. This marked the beginning of the Assassins really dominating the tag team scene in Georgia. In their 6th tag title reign, the Assassins held the belts for 168 days and took them into 1971 before dropping them to El Mongol and Ray Gunkel on April 2nd in Atlanta. Gunkel and Mongol had a good run with the belts as well, holding them 70 days before dropping them back to the Assassins on June 11, 1971 in Atlanta. The Assassins set out on another run of over 100 days, 112 to be exact, finally losing the title to Dick Steinborn and George Scott on October 1st, 1971. However, this led into a strange set of circumstances. The results of the match were originally nullified, and the titles declared vacant. Steinborn and Scott were originally not recognized as having won the belts, but retroactively, they were recognized as having a reign of less than 1 day. Steinborn and Scott faced the Assassins in a rematch with the stipulation that if Steinborn and Scott did not win the match, the Assassins would get the belts back. The match ended in a time-limit draw, so the Assassins officially began their 8th title reign on October 8, 1971. Around this time, the Assassins were proving to be a thorn in the side of the powers that be in Georgia Championship Wrestling, with various infractions and shenanigans centered on the Georgia TV title not too far in the past. The Assassins would officially be stripped of the tag title on November 19, 1971, ending their run at 42 days. The official reason given was multiple infractions over recent months. The Assassins would have the last laugh, however, when they regained the championship by defeating Bob Armstrong and Bill Dromo in the finals of a one-night tournament to crown new champions on November 26, 1971, in Atlanta. The celebration would be somewhat short-lived, with the Assassins losing the championship to Buddy Fuller and Ray Gunkel 21 days later on December 17, 1971, in Atlanta. Fuller and Gunkel's 4th and final time with the tag title proved to be a lengthy run of 92 days before they dropped the belts back to the Assassins on March 10, 1972. Originally, Fuller and Gunkel were awarded the belts by referee Eddie Smith. Despite the fact one of the Assassins clearly pinned Fuller, the referee was still dazed from an earlier collision. After a brief review and investigation by the NWA, the decision was reversed, and it was announced on TV the Assassins had regained the championship. This would also mark the final time the original Assassins held the Georgia tag belts. The final run came to an end after 162 days. An August 25, 1972 defense against Bob Armstrong and Dick Steinborn ended in an Armstrong-Steinborn win when the Assassins purposely got themselves disqualified. The belts were held up by Georgia Championship Wrestling the next day with a no disqualification rematch between the teams set for September 1st in Atlanta. That rematch ended in a time limit draw, and the championship was officially declared vacant. The Assassins were out of the territory shortly after that as pro wrestling in Georgia entered a pivotal time period. Ray Gunkel, who also owned and operated the booking office for Georgia Championship Wrestling, died of heart trauma on August 1st of that year. His widow, Ann Gunkel, announced her intention to take his place in the booking office, which was rejected by Ray's partners, who closed the office and opened a new one. In response, Ann started her own independent promotion, All South Wrestling Alliance, which directly competed with the NWA territory. Gunkel's new promotion even had TV time on WTCG, the same channel that carried Georgia Championship Wrestling, and featured former GCW announcer Ed Capral. That forced Georgia Championship Wrestling to scramble for a new host, deciding on Gordon Soley from Florida. Showing allegiance to Ann and respect to Ray, the Assassins and several other wrestlers moved to All South. The two promotions had an often nasty battle over the next 2 years, with the NWA-backed Georgia Championship Wrestling proving to be too powerful for the Outlaw promotion. Also, another Outlaw promotion started by Thunderbolt Patterson thinned out some of the talent pool. In 1974, All South went out of business, and Georgia Championship Wrestling took over their TV time slot, which is why from that time on, there were 2 distinct hours of Georgia Championship Wrestling on TV every Saturday. In the meantime, an 8-team tournament was held on September 15, 1972 in Atlanta to crown new Georgia Tag Team Champions. Ironically, the man who faced Ray Gunkel in Gunkel's last match, with some fans believing he actually killed Ray, took one half of the title. Ox Baker and Skandar Akbar defeated Bob Armstrong and Dick Steinborn in the tournament final to begin the 28th reign as Georgia Tag Champions. Baker and Akbar held the belts 35 days, dropping them to Argentina Apollo and Dick Steinborn on October 20th, 1972 in Atlanta. However, their reign would be a short one. Just 12 days later, the Georgia Tag Championship was officially declared vacant when Apollo and Steinborn left GCW in favor of Ann Gunkel's All South Championship Wrestling, where they were immediately recognized as the ASCW Georgia Tag Team Champions. The Battle of Atlanta had officially begun. Another 4-team tournament was set up for December 29, 1972 in Atlanta to again crown new champions. The father and son team of Eddie and Mike Graham defeated Sputnik and Rocket Monroe to become the 30th Georgia Tag Team Champions. By this time, Eddie was a part owner of the new booking office in Atlanta, and they likely drew more than a dime. Eddie and Mike held the championship 133 days, the third longest reign in the history of the title, finally dropping them to the Super Infernos, with manager J.C. Dykes on May 11, 1973, in Atlanta. No one would know it at the time, but Super Inferno number 1 was actually Doug Gilbert, the same wrestler who was the professional just a couple of years earlier. Curtis Smith was Inferno number 2 when they won the belts, but various wrestlers appeared under the mask while they were in Georgia. The Super Infernos held the title 29 days, losing the belts to Bob Orton Jr. and Mr. Wrestling 2 on June 9, 1973, in Atlanta. Orton and 2 had a decent run of 56 days before they lost the belts back to the Super Infernos on August 4, 1973, also in Atlanta. The Super Infernos held the championship 30 days, with their reign coming to an end after being stripped of the belts. The Infernos purposely got disqualified in the defense in Savannah, so they would lose the match but keep the belts. I actually couldn't find any records of a match in Savannah on September 3rd, so it may have been a phantom match. Maybe they were hoping to drum up some interest with a little controversy. The title remained vacant 18 days until Bobby Duncombe and Stan Vachon defeated Bob Armstrong and Tom Jones in a tournament final on September 21, 1973, in Atlanta. Vachon and Duncombe held the title 36 days, losing the belts to Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller on October 27, 1973, in Atlanta. Armstrong and Fuller's reign ended at 49 days when they lost to Gorgeous George Jr. and Bobby Shane, with manager and Elliot Gould lookalike Frenchie Bernard on December 15, 1973. During the televised match, Bill Watts approached ringside and appeared to hand something to Shane, who then put whatever it was against Robert Fuller's face. Fuller was suddenly unconscious and pinned to give Shane and George the title. Shane and George would officially be recognized as having a reign of less than 1 day after they were stripped of the title because of the use of a foreign object. A rematch was scheduled for December 21st, 1973 in Atlanta, where Bobby Shane and Gorgeous George Jr. regained the title, this time keeping the belts for another 14 days. Stan Vachon substituted for George in the defense on January 4th, 1974 against Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller. I couldn't find exactly what happened, but the belts were held up again at the end of the match and declared vacant. Bobby Shane was on his way to Australia for most of the year, and that may be the reason for getting the belts off them. This time a tournament was scheduled in Atlanta for January 18, 1974 to crown new champions. Terry and Ronnie Garvin, along with brother and manager Jimmy Garvin, defeated Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller to win the championship and spark a feud between the two teams. The Garvins held the belts 49 days before dropping them to Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller in Atlanta on March 8, 1974. Finally getting their hands back on the title, Armstrong and Fuller only held it for a week, losing the belts back to Terry and Ronnie Garvin on March 15, 1974 in Atlanta. Terry and Ronnie had another 70-day run with the tag title before dropping it back to Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller one more time in a no time limit, no disqualification match on May 24, 1974 in Atlanta as that feud neared its end. Armstrong and Fuller held the belts another week before losing them again, this time to the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Gene and Ole Anderson, on May 31, 1974 in Atlanta. This was the first of many title reigns for Gene and Ole to come. Of course, we've talked a bit about the Andersons on this channel before, one of the most famous families in pro wrestling, but none of them were actually related. Gene is the only one actually named Anderson and would obviously be a key figure as the elder statesman of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, but it would be Ole that went on to be one of the most significant figures in pro wrestling, not only for his in-ring action, but for his work as a booker and promoter in both Georgia and Mid-Atlantic. He was also part owner of Georgia Championship Wrestling when Vince McMahon took over in 1984, prompting him to found his own promotion, Championship Wrestling from Georgia, which became the NWA promotion. That turned out to play a key role in driving McMahon out of Georgia and selling to Jim Crockett Promotions. Lars would be a part of the group in the 60s and 70s, and in the 80s they injected some youth into things with Arn Anderson. There have been many wrestlers given the name Anderson over the years, but in Georgia in the 1970s, it was Gene and Ole that began dominating the tag team scene as vicious, unforgiving heels. The Andersons' first run with the Georgia Tag Championship lasted 63 days before they dropped the belts to Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 on August 2, 1974 in Atlanta. The Georgia Wrestling Icons only held the championship 2 weeks, losing them back to Gene and Ole Anderson on August 16, 1974 in Atlanta. The teams continued to feud over the belts, with Gene and Ole losing them back to Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 in Atlanta on September 6, 1974. Wrestling 1 and 2 were champions another 2 weeks before losing the belts back to Gene and Ole Anderson on September 20, 1974 in Atlanta. The Andersons were champions 35 days in their third reign when the title was held up and vacated after a controversial ending to a title defense against Harley Race and Buddy Colt. Race and Colt originally won the match, but I couldn't find what happened to hold up the belts, and Race and Colt were not recognized as champions. A tournament was held on November 1, 1974 in Atlanta to fill the vacancy. The Andersons made it to the finals, but fell short of getting the belts back, losing to Buddy Colt and Roger Kirby. Colt and Kirby had a nice run of 84 days with the tag championship before losing the belts to Jerry Briscoe and Rocky Johnson on January 24, 1975 in Atlanta. By this time, the Battle of Atlanta was over, as All South Championship Wrestling had folded and some wrestlers who defected to Ann Gunkel's promotion came back into the NWA territory, which included Assassin No. 2, who teamed with Toru Tanaka to take the tag titles from Briscoe and Johnson on March 17, 1975 in Augusta, Georgia. This also marked the first time in almost 6 years the Georgia Tag Team Championship changed hands somewhere other than Atlanta. Assassin 2 and Tanaka held the belts 53 days, losing them to Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller, who checked in with their fourth Georgia Tag Championship on May 9, 1975 in Atlanta. Armstrong and Fuller kept the title 49 days before losing the belts to Bob Orton Jr. and Dick Slater on June 27, 1975 in Atlanta. Orton and Slater held the belts just over a month before being required to vacate the title on July 29, 1975. Orton and Slater won the Georgia version of the United States Tag Team Championship, sometimes referred to as the Macon Tag Team Championship, which had just been reactivated after a long hiatus. That title would only last a little over 3 months before being deactivated again. Toru Tanaka and Mr. Fuji won a 4-team tournament on September 19, 1975 in Atlanta, defeating Tony Gurria and Dean Ho in the tournament final to crown new champions. This led into another odd stretch with some sketchy records. Of course, there had to be a stretch with sketchy records. Toru Tanaka had been appearing regularly in Southeastern Championship Wrestling and never came to the Georgia territory full time. There were a couple of sporadic appearances by Tanaka and Fuji over the next couple of weeks, but no title defenses I could find. Sometime before October 16, 1975, though there was no specific date or location given, Tanaka and Fuji dropped the Georgia Tag Championship to Bob Backlund and Jerry Briscoe in a Phantom match. By November, Fuji was out of the territory as well. Backlund and Briscoe only made a couple of title defenses, and by December, Backlund was splitting time between St. Louis and the AWA, and Briscoe had moved on to Florida. In another Phantom match, sometime around December 1st, 1975, Les Thornton and Tony Charles took the Georgia Tag Team Championship, and the title basically went into limbo for the next several weeks. The only defense I could find by Thornton and Charles was a disqualification loss to Bob Armstrong and Mr. Wrestling 2 on March 14, 1976 in Macon, and a match against Jerry and Ted Oates on March 19th. Maybe there were others, but that's the only ones I could find. Sometime after that March 19th match, the Georgia Tag Team Championship was finally officially declared vacant. A lot of sources actually list March 19th as when Jerry and Ted Oates won the belts from Thornton and Charles, but that isn't accurate. A round-robin tournament was held on May 21, 1976 in Atlanta to crown new champions, with Jerry and Ted Oates winning the championship at that point. And Jerry and Ted only held the belt 17 days before they dropped them to the Red Devils, Black Gordman, and the Great Goliath on June 7, 1976 in Augusta. That ended another long stretch of title changes in Atlanta, only to lead into another one. We do have one of those peculiarities that you only find in pro wrestling when Gordman and Goliath lost the belts. Most places list them losing the title after 25 days to Dean Ho and Ken Mantell on July 2, 1976 in Atlanta. However, it's one of those situations where they did this match twice. This happened in Georgia fairly often, especially with the television title. Gordman and Goliath dropped the belts to Ho and Mantell on June 29, 1976 in Macon, then repeated that title change 3 days later at the Omni in Atlanta. All that was ever said on TV was the title changed hands, without saying when or where, so people in both places came away thinking they saw the title change. We're going with the June 29, 1976 match since it was actually first. Ho and Mantell only held the belts until the middle of July when they lost them to Jimmy and Johnny Valiant in Griffin, Georgia on July 17, 1976. This is often listed as July 16th, but it was actually the 17th. The longtime Worldwide Wrestling Federation Tag Champions held the Georgia belts 48 days, losing them to the Black Bombers, Porkchop Cash, and Tom Jones on September 3, 1976 in Atlanta. World-class fans might remember Tom Jones as Mr. Ebony in WCCW in the early to mid-1980s. Cash and Jones kept the belts 49 days, losing them to Gene and Ole Anderson on October 22, 1976 in Atlanta. This is actually another title change they repeated for 2 crowds, redoing the match on October 25th in Augusta, but the one in Atlanta was first, so we're going with it. Gene and Ole re-entered the title picture with a nice reign of 91 days, feuding with Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 over the belts in the 1977. Wrestling 1 and 2 took the championship from the Andersons on January 21, 1977 in Atlanta. 1 and 2 kept the belts 18 days in their third run together with the championship before the titles were held up after a controversial ending to a February 8th match against the Andersons in Macon. A rematch was set for February 15th in Macon, with Wrestling 1 and 2 officially regaining the championship and beginning their 4th reign with the title. That 4th run only lasted 10 days, with Gene and Ole Anderson winning the title back on February 25, 1977 in Atlanta. This was the 5th and likely final run with the belts for Gene and Ole. That'll make more sense in a minute. Gene and Ole had another 63-day run with the title before losing it to Mr. Wrestling and Thunderbolt Patterson on April 29, 1977 in Atlanta. When the title reign for Mr. Wrestling and Thunderbolt Patterson came to an end is clear as mud. Sketchy records are something that always seem to pop up when Thunderbolt Patterson is involved. Every source says something different, and match records don't match up with any of it. Some sources say Gene and Ole Anderson took the belts on June 10th, but on that card, Bill Watts subbed for Mr. Wrestling and a defense with Patterson against Gene and Ole, and Watts and Patterson won the match. Other sources say Gene and Ole took the belts on July 4th, but Gene and Ole were also the NWA World Tag Team Champions at the time and successfully defended those belts on July 4th. Mr. Wrestling actually left Georgia in early July and went to Mid-Atlantic, so chances are the titles were simply vacated and the World Tag Team Championship the Andersons held are throwing some people off. It was around July 4th when Mr. Wrestling left the territory, so we'll say the title run ended at 66 days. The Georgia Tag title remained vacant until September 9, 1977, when an 8-team tournament was held in Atlanta. Tommy Rich and Tony Atlas defeated Pac Song and the Executioner in the final to take the championship. Rich and Atlas only held the belt 7 days before losing them to Pac Song and the Executioner on September 16, 1977 in Atlanta. The Executioner, by the way, would go on to be much better known, unmasked, as Sergeant Slaughter. The Song and Executioner had a nice run with the belts, holding them 60 days, and only losing them in a Phantom match to Tommy Rich and Tony Atlas, who officially began their second reign sometime before November 15, 1977. The Executioner had left the territory, and the switch was made to Rich and Atlas rather than vacating the title. Atlas and Rich were champions 27 days this time around, dropping the belts to Jacques Goulet and Ole Anderson on December 12, 1977 in Augusta. This was another time they had this match twice, once in Augusta on the 12th, and again in Macon on the 13th. The match in Augusta took place first, so that's what we'll go with here. The title continued to change hands rapidly, with Goulet and Anderson losing the belts after just 15 days to Dick Slater and Tony Atlas on December 27, 1977 in Macon. Slater and Atlas took the belts in the 1978, losing them back to Jacques Goulet and Ole Anderson on January 25, 1978 in Columbus, Georgia. Just 13 days later, Goulet and Anderson dropped the belts to Mr. Wrestling 2 and Tony Atlas on February 7, 1978 in Macon. That made Atlas a 4-time Georgia Tag Champion over the course of just 5 months with 3 different tag team partners. Wrestling 2 and Atlas held the title 20 days, losing the belts to Lars and Ole Anderson in Augusta on February 27, 1978. Even the Andersons couldn't keep their grip on the Georgia Tag Championship, though they did keep it just over a month before losing the belts to Thunderbolt Patterson and Tommy Rich on March 31, 1978 in Atlanta. Patterson and Rich almost made it through April 1978 with the belts, but ended up losing them back to Lars and Ole Anderson on April 28, 1978 in Atlanta. Lars and Ole barely made it out of April with the belts themselves, losing them back to Thunderbolt Patterson and Tommy Rich just 7 days later on May 5, 1978 in Atlanta. Patterson and Rich held the belts another 33 days before dropping them to Ivan Koloff and Ole Anderson on June 7, 1978 in Columbus, Georgia. Koloff and Anderson finally brought the hot potato to an end with a 108-day title reign, the first title reign over 100 days since Eddie and Mike Graham in late 1972, going into early 1973. Koloff and Anderson's long run came to an end on September 23, 1978, when they lost the title to Tommy Rich and future AWA World Champion Rick Martel in Atlanta. Martel and Rich only held the belts 27 days, losing them back to Ole Anderson and his new partner, Stan Hansen, on October 20, 1978 in Atlanta. Anderson and Hansen held the belts 22 days before they were stripped of the title on November 11, 1978. Now, the reason given that I found said Anderson and Hansen were stripped of the titles for repeatedly getting disqualified in their defenses. They actually defended the title a lot, 9 times in 22 days, including a no disqualification match against Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2. The thing is, from the match records I could find, the only time they lost the match by DQ but kept the belts was a November 10th defense against Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2. So I don't know if fans were just told they kept getting disqualified because they needed to get the belts off them for some reason, or the reason given was something more specific to that DQ loss to Wrestling 1 and 2. Whatever the case, they were stripped of the belts and the title was left vacant 12 days until a 10-team tournament was held in Atlanta on November 23, 1978. Dory Jr. and Terry Funk won the tournament final over Jack and Jerry Briscoe, giving the Funk brothers their first and only run with the Georgia Tag Team Championship. Dory and Terry held the belts 39 days, and with a new year came new champions. The Funks dropped the belts to Jack and Jerry Briscoe on January 1, 1979 in Atlanta. Jack and Jerry lost the championship after 18 days to Ivan Koloff and Ole Anderson on January 19, 1979, also in Atlanta. Just 4 months after their 108-day run with the belts ended, Koloff and Anderson had another run of 96 days before losing the title to Norvell Austin and Rufus R. Jones on April 25, 1979 in Augusta. There are some sources that say that title change happened on April 23rd. I couldn't confirm anything one way or the other, frankly, but most say April 25th, so I went with that. If it was the 23rd or the 25th, Austin and Jones's reign was a short one, with the belts being declared vacant on May 1st, 1979, when Jones left the territory and went to Mid-Atlantic. Another 10-team tournament was set up for May 18, 1979 in Atlanta. Tommy Rich and Wahoo McDaniel took the belts, beating Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff in the final. Tommy and Wahoo held the championship 21 days, dropping the belts to Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff on June 8, 1979 in Atlanta. Koloff and Anderson's grip on the belts was a little looser this time, only holding the title 24 days before losing it to Tommy Rich and a now babyface Stan Hansen on July 2, 1979 in Augusta. Rich and Hansen had a decent run of 57 days with the title before dropping the belts to Ivan Koloff and Ole Anderson on August 28, 1979 in Atlanta. This would be Koloff and Anderson's fourth and final run with the belts together. That final run was somewhat short, lasting 24 days and ending with losing the title to Tommy Rich and Crusher Lasowski, who is better known simply as the Crusher, on September 21, 1979 in Atlanta. Crusher and Rich only held the belts 14 days, dropping them to Ernie Ladd and Ole Anderson on October 5, 1979 in Atlanta. The Ladd and Anderson reign was a short one, but led into one of the most famous storylines in pro wrestling history. Immediately after winning the Georgia Tag Team Championship, Ole began voicing his displeasure with the way Ladd, his manager Bobby Heenan, and other members of Heenan's stable were behaving and conducting business. During a televised match on Georgia Championship Wrestling between Ladd and Mass Superstar against Buzz Sawyer and Bob Armstrong, Sawyer was injured with a foreign object and tossed out of the ring. Ladd, Superstar, and Heenan began attacking Armstrong, prompting Anderson to interfere and prevent Armstrong from being injured as well. The Ladd and Anderson team were officially split, and Ole Anderson was an unlikely babyface. A week later, a match for the Georgia Tag Team Championship and a televised match on October 11, 1979 took place, but this defense was a little different. Ernie Ladd put his half of the title on the line while tagging with Mass Superstar. Ole Anderson put his half of the title up while tagging with Stan Hansen. The match ended in a time-limit draw, forcing the powers that be to declare the title vacant. The tournament was held on November 22, 1979 in Atlanta to fill the vacancy. Austin Idol and Mass Superstar defeated Jack and Jerry Briscoe in the final to take the Georgia Tag Championship. The Idol and Superstar reign would be short, ending after 8 days when they lost the belts to Jack and Jerry Briscoe on November 30, 1979 in Atlanta. Though it was the Briscoe brothers that won the title, they would not be defending the belts. Jack was going back to Florida and was allowed to surrender his half of the title to Ole Anderson. The team of Jerry Briscoe and Ole Anderson quickly lost the championship, dropping the belts to Ivan Koloff and Alexis Smirnoff on December 7, 1979 in Atlanta. Ending a very active year filled with short title runs, Smirnoff and Koloff took the belts well into 1980, with a 136-day title reign. The Russians finally lost the title to Kevin Sullivan and Tony Atlas on April 21, 1980, in Augusta. Sullivan and Atlas only held the belts 5 days, losing them back to Alexis Smirnoff and Ivan Koloff on April 26, 1980. Some sources say that match took place on April 24th, but this was a somewhat famous televised match in which Koloff and Smirnoff manager Rock Hunter used an ether-soaked rag to disable Atlas and allow Koloff to pin him for the victory. Of course, April 26th was a Saturday, which is when the televised matches took place in Georgia. For their efforts, Smirnoff and Koloff got another 43 days as champion before losing the belts to Lars and Ole Anderson on June 8, 1980 in Atlanta. And this would actually be Ole Anderson's final time holding the Georgia Tag Team Championship, giving him 17 different title reigns with various different partners. That is, by far, the most Georgia Tag title reigns for any one person. And that final run was a short but pivotal one, as Lars and Ole dropped the belts just 8 days later in Augusta to the Assassins on June 16, 1980. And this Assassins team consisted of Jody Hamilton as Assassin number 1 and Randy Colley as Assassin number 2. You might know Colley better as Moondog Rex. Now, this sparked a feud between the Assassins and the Andersons over the belts, leading to the unlikely pairing of Ole Anderson and Dusty Rhodes. Just a year earlier, Georgia fans would never have dreamed Dusty and Ole would be tagging together, as the two had a violent ongoing feud over the years. The stage was set. The Assassins defended the Georgia Tag Team Championship against Dusty Rhodes and Ole Anderson in a steel cage match on July 20th, 1980 at the Omni in Atlanta. An added stipulation to the match saw Assassins ally Ivan Koloff as one of 2 special referees. Ole's brother Gene served as the second special referee to seemingly even things out. During the match, Rhodes was battling both Assassins with Koloff interfering. Gene Anderson would step in to pull Koloff back, but the Assassins kept double-teaming Rhodes until he could finally make it to his corner to tag in Ole Anderson. Stepping in the ring, Anderson first stared down the Assassins, before suddenly turning and attacking Dusty Rhodes, as Koloff and the Assassins initially looked on in shock. Ole's entire face turn was a ruse that even the heels weren't aware of, other than Gene. It was all to get Dusty Rhodes in the exact position he was in now, a 5-on-1 situation, trapped in a steel cage. Lars Anderson rushed to the ring to help Dusty, making it clear he was not part of the plan, but for Ole and Gene, they were once again among the most hated heels in the Georgia territory. The next week on television, Ole gave the famous "He Asked Me" promo. Despite Anderson saying it took him a year and a half, it was only about 10 months. But that promo is recognized as one of the greatest promos of all time. As for the Georgia Tag titles, the Assassins held them another 10 days after the Dusty match. Mr. Wrestling and Steve Kern took the belts on July 30th, 1980 in Columbus, Georgia. That turned out to be something of a token run, as Mr. Wrestling and Kern dropped the belts back to the Assassins after 7 days on August 6, 1980, also in Columbus. The Assassins had another 44 days as champions before they lost the belts to Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 on September 19, 1980, in Griffin, Georgia. This was the first time in 3 years Wrestling 1 and 2 held the belts together, also marking the third and final time they would hold the Georgia Tag Team Championship. On October 10, 1980 in Atlanta, Wrestling 1 and 2 defended in a 3-way tag team match against the Assassins and a new team on the scene, the fabulous Freebirds, Terry Gordy and Michael Hayes. It would be Gordy and Hayes taking the title, which also gave birth to the Freebird rule, allowing 3-man teams to use any combination of the 3 to defend the tag championship. For the Freebirds, it could be Gordy, Hayes, or Freebird partner Buddy Roberts. With the Freebirds comes a time that is tough to follow for the Georgia Tag Team Championship, as it neared the end of its own existence. On November 27, 1980, Buddy Roberts and Terry Gordy defeated Robert Fuller and Stan Frazier in a tournament final to crown new NWA National Tag Team Champions, with the team holding that title under the same rules. 3 days prior to that, the Georgia Tag belts were held up after a controversial Freebirds defense against Austin Idol and Kevin Sullivan. Now, I'm making an assumption here, but I think the original intention was to simply let the Georgia Tag Team Championship fade into memory and allow the National Tag Team Championship to take its place as the primary tag title. And for a while that's what happened, but apparently minds were changed, and the Georgia Tag Team Championship was back on the table. Many sources get the Georgia Tag Championship and National Tag Championship mixed together. In fairness, there were times on television broadcasts the names Georgia and National were used almost interchangeably. I can't guarantee the following is 100% accurate, because trying to follow what happened more than 40 years later is like trying to catch a fart in a frying pan, but this is accurate as far as I can determine. No resolution to the held-up Georgia Tag title was given. The Freebirds were simply given the belts back, and on January 26, 1981, they defended both the Georgia and National Tag Team Championship in Augusta, losing both to Ted DiBiase and Stan Frazier. DiBiase and Frazier only held the titles 5 days before both championships were held up following a defense in Atlanta against Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts on January 31, 1981. A rematch for the National Tag title was set for February 2, 1981 in Augusta, where Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts won that championship back for the Freebirds. On February 7, 1981, Gordy and Roberts defeated Stan Frazier and Robert Fuller, subbing for Ted DiBiase, to get the Georgia Tag title back. The Freebirds held both sets of belts into June, finally dropping the Georgia Tag Team Championship to Ted DiBiase and Steve Olszanowski, or commonly referred to as Steve-O, on June 11, 1981 in Marietta, Georgia. It was shortly after this that the Freebirds famously split. Buddy Roberts left the territory altogether, while Michael Hayes turned babyface and began feuding with his former partner Terry Gordy. This left the National Tag Team Championship vacant and put the Georgia Tag Team Championship at the center of the new feud's attention. DiBiase and Steve-O held the Georgia Tag title into July, dropping the belts to Terry Gordy and Jimmy Snuka on July 6, 1981 in Augusta. Michael Hayes spent several weeks trying to take the Georgia Tag titles from Gordy and Snuka with a variety of partners, including Ted DiBiase, Tommy Rich, and even Kevin Von Erich, but continually fell short. It was finally the team of Michael Hayes and former Oakland Raider Otis Sistrunk that took the Georgia Tag title from Gordy and Snuka in a steel cage match at the Omni in Atlanta on September 27, 1981. This was only Sistrunk's second pro wrestling match, and it turned out to be one of only 10 he would have. Shortly after making their one and only defense of the Georgia Tag Championship, a disqualification win over Terry Gordy and Ray Stevens, Otis Sistrunk decided pro wrestling wasn't for him and left both the territory and the profession. Michael Hayes and Otis Sistrunk were the last team to hold the Georgia Tag Team Championship, as there was an apparent decision to go back to the original plan. On November 25, 1981, Bob and Brad Armstrong won a tournament to finally fill the vacant National Tag Team Championship. With the Georgia Tag title left in limbo, that title was quietly merged with the National Tag Team Championship, and the Georgia Tag Team Championship no longer existed. And that is the relatively short and sometimes chaotic history of the Georgia Tag Team Championship. The NWA did reactivate the tag title in later years, but this was once the NWA was a smaller organization and it was being used in promotions like Music City Wrestling and NWA Wildside. I wouldn't even consider it part of the same lineage, but I did want to mention it. It was originally brought back in 1998 with Music City Wrestling. Joel Deaton and Billy Black were among the teams that held it there. The next year it moved over to NWA Wildside, and for 4 months between February 2000 and June 2000, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, the Rock and Roll Express, held the belts. In 2001, Shane Helms and Shannon Moore held the title as 3 count, and later that year, David Flair held one half of the title with Romeo Bliss. In 2002, it was one of the first championships for Jay and Mark Briscoe. Currently, the Georgia Tag Team Championship is based in the revived Georgia Championship Wrestling, which is now an independent promotion. The Georgia Tag Team Champions, as of the making of this video in July 2025, are Dead Man's Hands, Chop Top, and Jerry Nelms, who apparently can't have a picture taken without flipping off the camera. I hope you enjoyed this title history. If you'd like to see more videos on title lineage, you can check out the playlist or watch one of the other videos on the channel by clicking the links on the end screen. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, not necessarily in that order, and I will see you next time.